In Ecuador, indigenous-led protests demanding a fuel price cut are now on their 10th day.
Intense clashes continue between police forces and demonstrators as some 10,000 march toward the historic center of Quito. More details on this later in the news. Good evening. I'm CJ Hero.
And I'm Nina Richie Alagao Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. And now for the headlines.
Vowing to prevent disruption, PNP to set up checkpoints in the metropolis 2 days before Marcos' inauguration. President-elect Marcos Jr. designates numerous names in various positions for his incoming administration. UN calls for $15 million in urgent aid for earthquake-hit Afghanistan, where more than 1,000 people have died. Russian ruble hits 7-year high against the US dollar in Moscow trade. And Hollywood superstar Brad Pitt hints at retirement.
The Philippine National Police will activate Task Force Manila Shield 2 days before the inauguration of President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Manila Shield is a security plan wherein police authorities will set up checkpoints on all boundaries and roads leading to Manila. PNP Director for Operation Police Major General Val de Leon says about 16,000 security personnel and force multipliers from different agencies will be deployed on June 30. Protesters will not be allowed to hold a rally outside Freedom Parks to avoid disrupting the ceremony and to prevent traffic congestion. Police personnel is also reminded of the strategies of rallyists who usually start a commotion to get attention. The PNP says it is in close coordination with demonstrators to ensure the orderly and peaceful exercise of their rights to expression and assembly on Inauguration Day.
The intelligence group of the Philippine National Police is already taking action against alleged plans to humiliate President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and disrupt his oath-taking rites. Vin Pascua reports.
The Philippine National Police will not allow anyone to disrupt the inauguration of President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. on June 30. PNP Director for Operations, Police Major General Valeriano de Leon guarantees this as he speaks live on Net25's morning show Kada Umaga. De Leon says the PNP's intelligence group is tracing which groups are behind plans to disrupt the occasion.
These reports are being validated by our intelligence community at meron nga silang mga na-validate na kaya ito ay umaabot sa mga security sector at kami naman po ay naghahanda. Tulad ng sabi ko, there are 4 freedom parks where they could stage their rally, no? And dito sa mga lugar na to ay hindi mo rin pwedeng pigilan. Pati na ang pro-Marcos to conduct their own rally to air whatever issues they have, no? At nire-respeto yan ng ating bayan na nakasaad sa ating batas. Pero kung kayo naman ay lumabas na dyan sa Freedom Park, ay dyan na tayo maaring hindi magkasundo, no? And but I receive a specific instruction from the officer in charge to have a maximum tolerance.
The PNP is verifying information to ensure that its actions are on point. Meanwhile, it will closely monitor President-elect Marcos Jr.'s activity after his inauguration. Vin Pascua reporting for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Communist organizations and other political critics of President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. have allegedly hatched a plot to destabilize his incoming administration. Eden Santos has the details.
An ally of President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has exposed plans to destabilize the incoming administration. Attorney Larry Gadon, who ran for Senate under the Uniteam ticket, says one of the possible scenarios would be similar to the Plaza Miranda bombing in the 70s, which will be blamed on the incoming government. Gadon says they have information on the alleged destabilization plan forged by groups opposed to Marcos, including politicians and elements from communist organizations. Gadon added that part of the plan is to launch a series of protests against Marcos Jr.'s administration.
Hindi talaga titigil itong mga kaliwa at itong mga yelo na gumawa ng kaguluhan against the administration of the incoming President Bongbong Marcos Jr.
Gadon says the bombing during the Liberal Party rally in August 1971, which was blamed on then President Ferdinand Marcos Sr., might be replicated during the rallies to be participated by young recruits of communist groups. Thus, the lawyer calls on parents to prevent their children from participating in rallies to protect them from any harm.
Sapagkat mayroong pattern Ganyan yung pattern na ginawa nila noong 1970s. So they will just repeat the pattern that they have done in 1970s. And one of the culminating actions that they will do is itong pasabugan ng granada yung mga nagrarally para ma-blame kay Bongbong Marcos. Yan ang plano nila. And kaya nga ako ay talagang mahigpit na nananawagan sa mga magulang. Bantayan nyo yung mga anak nyo. Baka isang araw na lang ay makikita nyo na nakabulagta sa kalye yung anak nyo duguan.
Meanwhile, Gadon favors the proposal to cease any peace negotiations with the CPP and the FNPA. Instead, he believes the government should triple the budget allocated to the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, or NTF-LCAC, to help protect the youth from being recruited by the communist movement, especially in remote areas of the country.
Naman natin, nakailang peace talks na yan na wala rin naman nangyayari. And dahil na patuloy pa rin ang kanilang mga programa at yung kanilang mga pagkilos against the government, dapat ay atin na lang dagdagan yung budget ng NTF-LCAC dahil na nabawasan ang paggasali o pagsanib ng mga ating mga kababayan dito sa mga komunista sa NPA dahil nagkaroon na sila ng pagkakataon na magkaroon ng hanap buhay o kaya nagkaroon ng improvement yung kanilang mga komunidad. Kaya dapat na ang gawin ay triplihin yung budget ng NTF-LCAC.
Eden Santos reporting for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
President Rodrigo Duterte has already packed up in Malacanang several days before his return as citizen Digong. Vic Sumintak reports.
Exactly a week before his term ends, President Rodrigo Duterte has already packed up all his things as he prepares to leave Malacanang and his official residence for 6 years, the Bahay Pangarap, inside the PSG compound. Presidential spokesman Martin Andanar says the president is expected to go back to his home in Davao City following the turnover of power to President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at noon on June 30. Andanar assures the public that up until the last day of his administration, President Duterte will continue to perform his duty as chief executive. Andanar says President Duterte wants to ensure a peaceful and orderly transfer of power to President-elect Marcos Jr. As part of the transition program, President Duterte will be given his last military honor as the outgoing Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines through a 21-gun salute. Vic Sumintak for Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has nominated former Philippine Airlines President and Chief Operating Officer Jaime Bautista as Transportation Secretary-Designate. Executive Secretary-Designate Vic Rodriguez confirms the said appointment. Bautista accepted the offer after a meeting with the president-elect in his headquarters in Mandaluyong City. The former PAL chief said he was not aware of the offer until his meeting with Marcos Jr. He added that Marcos's initial directive is to develop the main gateway and see that it meets the highest standards. Meanwhile, Marcos Jr. has also appointed veteran journalist and lawyer Cheloy Garafil as chairman-designate of the Land Transportation Franchising and Regulatory Board. Garafil has a master's degree in National Security Administration.
The camp of President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. announced more appointments today. The president-elect has nominated outgoing Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello III as chairperson of the Manila Economic and Cultural Office in Taiwan. The announcement came as a gift to Secretary Bello, who is also celebrating his birthday today. Marcos Jr. has also renominated former Cabinet Secretary Carlo Nograles as chairperson of the Civil Service Commission. Earlier, the Commission on Appointments technically bypassed Nograles along with appointees from the Commission on Elections and Commission on Audit for lack of quorum. Some lawmakers also suggested that the incoming president be given the prerogative to appoint officials to such constitutional offices. Meanwhile, the president-elect nominated broadcaster and former Light Rail Transit Authority Deputy Administrator Cesar Chavez as Undersecretary-designate for Rails of the Department of Transportation.
As France and the Philippines celebrate 75 years of bilateral relations, France vows to consider the country in terms of its trade and investment expansion. Mean Corvera reports.
France is considering the Philippines a trade and investment destination. This was announced by the French ambassador to the Philippines at the launching of the activities for the 75th year of diplomatic relations between Philippines and France. She says more Filipinos will benefit from these expansion programs.
We have a number of French and Filipino companies being partners and being part and parcel of our 75th anniversary. You saw the French-Filipino Chamber of Commerce, for example, being present here. And we have a number also of businessmen that are in the room with us today. So we think this is a great opportunity also to, after the COVID time and after this rather difficult period, to again, continue building and strengthening and coming with new ideas and new partnership in the relationship. There's a number of areas where we've already been approached for an interest with the cooperation between France and the Philippines.
Ambassador Michel Boucous mentioned the strengthening of the bilateral defense and maritime cooperation between the two countries. France is also pushing for renewable energy development and the possible establishment of nuclear power plants in the Philippines.
One of them is energy issues, for example, which is a very, very important topic where the cheaper energy as fuel prices are going on becomes a real important and urgent matter. And also renewable, including renewable energy like nuclear energy, which has been recognized as one of the non-polluting energies in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So these are areas where we can collaborate. Green energy as well. For example, a French company recently opened a hydrogen-powered plant, which is very creative in the south of the Philippines.
Meanwhile, the Department of Foreign Affairs says France has lined up several tourism and cybersecurity projects to help the Philippines recover from the effects of the pandemic.
The joint economic meeting is planned to be held in November 2022. So it's economic, that includes business. So we convey to each other, we discuss both sides, Philippines and France, the concerns that are related to economics. So those businessmen, and we have several agreements in the pipeline of various sectors, the defense, tourism cooperation, what else, in cyber crimes, and a lot more. So these are in the works. Many of our agreements involve several departments, so we have to, on the side of the Philippines, we have to have interagency meetings, lots of them, and it's a lot of back and forth involving drafts.
As both countries celebrate Philippines-France relations, this Sunday, the France-Philippines Friendship Park will be inaugurated at the Las Piñas Parañaque Wetland Park. Representatives from the two countries will plant 10 endemic trees as part of their commitment to protect the environment and biodiversity and combat climate change. Mayan Corvera reporting for Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
Next on Mata ng Agila International, $15 million requested for immediate needs in the wake of deadly Afghanistan quake. Ukrainian kamikaze drone strike hits oil refinery in southern Russia. And commercial airplane catches fire after landing gear collapses at Miami International Airport. Stay tuned for more stories around the globe when we return.
Ang morning show na always nagbibigay ng ngiti at saya sa bawat kada all over the world. Tara na't ma-inspire at ma-amaze sa kwento ng mga bawat kada na nagwagi sa anumang hamon at pagsubok ng buhay. Itago na mga remote control at tumambay lang dito sa paborito niyong barkada sa umaga, ang Kada Umaga! Dahil kayo ang bida dito.
Kumanda ka!
Isang sugat mula noon. Nababakas hanggang ngayon. Handog ng Net25. Ang Korean novela na magbibigay pag-asa na maghihilom anumang sugat. At ang araw ay muling sisikat. A Place in the Sun. Simula June 27, alas 8 ng gabi. Dito lang sa Net25.
Panalo tayo pag together. Walang talo pag together. Let's dance together. Sa Net25.
This is still Mata ng Agila International. An estimated $15 million in emergency relief aid is immediately needed after an overnight 5.9 magnitude earthquake struck Afghanistan. United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator for Afghanistan, Ramiz Alakbarov, explained how the funding would be used.
Estimates, we're talking of what has been seen, probably at least $15 million will be required immediately to respond to multi-sectoral needs. We're concerned about not just non-food items and getting people into shelters and providing medical supplies, but also preventing waterborne diseases.
An estimated 2,000 homes have been destroyed by the deadly quake. At least 1,000 people were dead and thousands injured, with the toll expected to rise as rescue operations get stalled due to lack of machinery.
In Bingerville, a township in Ivory Coast, residents are mopping up after a torrential rain left a trail of death and destruction. At least 5 people have died, 4 of them children. According to the head of the fire brigade, the children were buried in a landslide while the adult was swept away by flood waters. Another 85 people were rescued. Many residents say the water has taken everything away, leaving them with nothing to eat or wear. The storm dumped 200 millimeters of rain between Monday and midday Tuesday.
The Duterte administration has cautioned the public not to be complacent as COVID-19 infections are on the rise, not only in Metro Manila, but also in other parts of the country. Presidential spokesman Martin Andanar reminds everyone to always wear a face mask when in public. Andanar says they will strictly impose masking in public places until President Rodrigo Duterte's term expires on June 30. The outgoing administration, meanwhile, says it is up to the incoming administration to amend or continue implementing its face mask policy. Andanar urges the public to continue observing minimum health protocols as the country detects more cases of Omicron subvariants.
A drone strike may have sparked a fire at a Russian oil refinery near the country's border with Ukraine. The blaze has been extinguished and there were no casualties. The region's governor did not specify where the drones originated, but he said fragments of the unmanned aircraft were found at the site. Work at the plant has been suspended while an investigation is underway. Russia has accused Ukraine several times of launching attacks near the border. The refinery fire comes days after Moscow accused Ukraine of firing at Black Sea drilling rigs off the coast of Crimea.
Russian special forces have visited fortifications abandoned by fleeing Ukrainian troops in Donbass. Igor Shtanov of RT News accompanies the Russian military as it inspects a fortified position where Western supplies were ditched. Let's watch this.
Special forces of the Russian army. We are right now moving towards the positions quite recently captured from the Ukrainian troops, and we're about to see the fortifications that they have both erected and dug into the ground, well, over the past 8 years. And we're about to see what's left of them after the work of the Russian artillery, jets, and, well, infantry. А для общего понимания, расскажи, здесь разминировано? Нет. Trenches deep enough to safely shelter a man of average height sprout across the area. Amid concrete-laden fortifications, we find Western-supplied weapons Ukrainian troops abandoned in a hurry as they fled.
This is a permanent fortification. If we go inside, we can see the reinforced doors. They are made of thick steel with sand inside. Going further, we see another door of the same type. And these are the firing positions. Each of them has its own zone. These windows are reinforced as well with thick steel as we saw before. On the inside here, the position is draped with asbestos so it cannot catch fire.
And this is how the same firing position, which you have just seen from the inside, looks from the outside. There's extra protection in the front, on the sides as well. You don't have to be a military expert to see that it takes a lot of firepower to, well, overcome and kick the forces out of a fortification like this one. And these are the remains of a cluster munition that the Ukrainian forces used against their former own abandoned, well, fortifications. These type of munition is banned pretty much all over the world. As we explore this labyrinth, we make a disturbing discovery. The Ukrainian positions are spidering across the fields here in all directions. And if they need to establish something like this, a command center, any place is good enough, even the cemetery. There's no red lines, it seems, for Kiev forces in this war. Ethics is expendable. Decency is in excess. Amir Gazdanov reporting from the Donbass, RT.
As Russia commemorated the anniversary of the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi troops in 1941, Moscow accuses Germany of anti-Russian sentiment. Russia's foreign ministry said Russophobic hysteria is systematically fueled by almost daily public attacks by the German government against Russia. Tensions between Moscow and Berlin have soared after Germany condemned Russia's military campaign in Ukraine. Germany has implemented sanctions on Russia and has supplied weapons to Ukraine. Last week, Russia's energy giant Gazprom slashed gas supplies to Germany via the Nord Stream pipeline. Berlin called the move an economic attack.
As summer hits the U.S., the White House is calling on Congress to give Americans much-needed relief from soaring gas prices. In Washington, D.C., Crisan Fragada tells us what President Joe Biden wants to happen.
U.S. President Joe Biden calls on Congress to suspend the federal gas tax for 3 months. The announcement came as American drivers are revving up for the summer season. They do so while facing the highest inflation in 4 decades. Biden asks lawmakers as well as gas stations to help relieve the pain at the pump.
I'd like to talk to you about the actions I'm announcing to bring down gas prices. First, today I'm calling on Congress to suspend the federal gas tax for the next 90 days through the busy summer season, busy travel season. By suspending the 18-cent gas tax, federal gas tax, for the next 90 days, we can bring down the price of gas and give families just a little bit of relief. My message is simple. To the companies running gas stations and setting those prices at the pump, this is a time of war, global peril, Ukraine. These are not normal times. Bring down the price you are charging at the pump to reflect the cost you are paying for the product. Do it now. Do it today. Your customers, the American people, they need relief now.
Average gas prices in the U.S. soared since the start of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. From about $2 a gallon, the U.S. national average stands at a near $5 per gallon. Biden faces an uphill battle getting his gas tax relief plan passed. Republican congressmen are critical of the plan. His fellow Democrats skeptical. Crisan Fragada, Washington, D.C., Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
High gasoline prices fueled violent clashes between protesters and police in Ecuador. The protests have been going on for 10 days now and are led by the powerful Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador. Students, workers, and others have also joined the Confederation in its protests. Police lobbed tear gas and fired rubber bullets into the crowd of about 500 demonstrators in the capital of Quito. Human rights observers say 90 civilians and 100 security personnel have been injured, 2 left dead, and 87 civilians arrested since the countrywide protests started. One of the key demands of the demonstrators is a lowering of fuel prices, which have risen sharply in recent months. Although Ecuador exports crude oil, it imports much of the fuel it consumes.
Some terrifying moments for passengers aboard a jetliner that caught fire as it touched down at Miami International Airport. Take a look. There were 140 people aboard the Red Air flight, which was arriving from the Dominican Republic late Tuesday. After the landing gear in its nose collapsed, the airliner caught fire while skidding down the runway. Investigators are on the scene trying to figure out what went wrong. Thankfully, there were no deaths. 3 people did end up in the hospital, but none of the injuries are serious. Miami Mayor Daniela Levin says it is incredible that everyone made it out alive.
Of course, what happened here is a miracle because the plane landed, apparently the tire burst, and then it went back up and came back down, and the landing was so hard that the entire landing apparatus was destroyed, and the belly of the plane is on the ground. And it slid, and it spun, and it caught a sign, and the wing caught on fire.
Up next, China criticizes Western sanctions on Russia as self-harming. Lone Lab manufacturing licensed the monkeypox vaccine ready to meet global demand. And U.S. jury finds Bill Cosby guilty of sexually assaulting a teen in the 1970s. We've got more stories coming your way when Mata ng Agila International returns.
Abangan sa Lutong Daza. May pa-birthday party para sa nag-iisang envoy. Pinoy spaghetti, nachos, pandesal pizza, pati na din mango float. Sasakit ang tiyan nyo sa kakatawa.
Ang alin? Yung pagluluto ng spaghetti.
Sa umaga.
Kita-kits sa Lutong Daza sa Net25.
Saan mang panig ng mundo, ihanda na ang shopping list nyo dahil narito na ang online shopping show kung saan ang hanap nyo, meron dito. Narito na ang Shopping All the Way with Jojo A. Eat na hit? We have it! May sayawan, tawanan, pati na iyakan. Pati pets nyo mag-i-enjoy dito. But wait, there's more. Dahil pati celebrity sellers, makikipag-online selling din. At hindi lang yan, dahil may chance kayong makabili ng collectible items mula sa inyong mga paboritong artista. Kaya what are you waiting for? Add to cart na! Shopping All the Way with Jojo A. Opening soon sa Net25.
And we're back with more global news here on Mata ng Agila International. Alexei Arestovich, a prominent advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, said Ukraine's eventual membership in NATO and the EU is a mere formality. In an interview, Arestovich said Kyiv is already a de facto member of the US-led military alliance, which pledged to help it win. He also said that Ukraine has just joined the Three Seas initiative as a backdoor to the EU, adding that it did not matter whether NATO or the EU was ready to accept Kyiv. Arestovich told YouTuber Mark Fagin that by just becoming a candidate, Ukraine can have access to EU development funds with which Poland had built up its infrastructure.
Предстоит саммит в Мадриде, НАТО, на который приглашен Владимир Зеленский, президент Зеленский.
He added that by becoming the 13th country of the Trimerium, there is also access to money, transport, security at sea, and infrastructure. As reported by RT News, Arestovich was referring to Polish President Andrzej Duda's announcement that the group had created a special participatory partnership status for Ukraine. Arestovich also insisted that more than 50 countries in the US-led Ukraine Defense Contact Group have promised that they would never, ever let Kyiv lose the war.
Chinese President Xi Jinping warned against expanding military ties in a speech ahead of a virtual summit with top leaders from Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa. Beijing is hosting the meeting of the influential club of BRICS emerging economies, which accounts for more than 40% of the global population and nearly a quarter of the world's gross domestic product. She told the BRICS Business Forum that the Ukraine crisis is a wake-up call and warned against the expansion of military alliances and seeking one's own security at the expense of other countries' security. She also lambasted the U.S. and EU sanctions on Russia, saying sanctions are a boomerang and a double-edged sword.
一再证明，制裁是回旋镖、双刃剑，把世界经济政治化、工具化、武器化，利用国际金融货币体系的主导地位肆意制裁，终将 损人害己，使世界人民
в простых условиях, когда западные партнеры пренебрегают базовыми принципами рыночной экономики, свободной торговли, неприкосновенностью частной собственности, проводят при этом
In a call last week, Xi also assured his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, that Beijing would support Moscow's core interests in sovereignty and security. Xi's remarks prompted the U.S. to warn China that it risked ending up on the wrong side of history. Meanwhile, leaders of the Group of 7 nations will be meeting next week in Germany to discuss how to proceed with sanctions on Russia.
The number of children forced out of school or whose education was disrupted in conflict has reached 222 million. That is up from 75 million estimated to be in the same situation in 2016, according to a fresh report from the United Nations. The report found that about 78.2 million of the children are completely out of school, 54% of them being girls. Another nearly 120 million children attend school, but in such difficult conditions that they do not achieve minimum proficiency in math or reading. Yasmin Sharif, Director of Education Cannot Wait, voiced particular concern over the findings.
And when you don't go to school, you are very exposed to being, if you're a boy, forcibly recruited into armed groups, terrorist groups, militia, government groups. And if you're a girl, you are exposed to becoming part of gender-based violence at home, sexual violence, trafficking, early marriages, and early childbirth.
Danish company Bavarian Nordic has seen its order book fill up as monkeypox disease spreads around the world. Company's Vice President Rolf Sass Sorensen said they only sold a few hundred doses when they got the approval in 2019. But all of a sudden, its vaccine against monkeypox became very relevant for international health. Sorensen says he is confident the biotech company can meet global demand, even though it only has one production facility.
We have an annual capacity in our manufacturing site at approximately 30 million doses annually. So we can produce quite a lot of doses. We can, with the current demand, we can easily supply the global market.
Bavarian Nordic is the lone laboratory manufacturing a licensed vaccine against monkeypox. It can produce a capacity of 30 million doses. The European Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority has already bought more than 100,000 doses for the 27 EU countries, as well as Norway and Iceland. The United States, Canada, and Denmark have also placed orders with Bavarian Nordic. Despite the rise in monkeypox cases worldwide, the World Health Organization has not recommended the mass vaccination of populations at this stage.
Actor Bill Cosby used to be known as America's Dad. He became popular by playing clean-cut father roles on TV sitcoms. In real life, accusations of sexual abuse have plagued the entertainer. Recently, a jury in California determined that he had assaulted a teenager in the 1970s. Ivan Xavier Odiver in Los Angeles has the details.
In a civil suit filed against Bill Cosby, a jury found the U.S. entertainer sexually assaulted a teenager almost 5 decades ago. Judy Huth was awarded $500,000 in damages after a jury in Santa Monica, California, determined that Cosby molested her in 1975. After the decision, Huth commented on what the victory meant.
You know, it really does. It's been torture. It has. Just to be ripped apart, you know, thrown under the bus, backed over, and this to me is such a big victory. It really is. To all victims.
Huth was just 16 years old when the abuse happened at the Playboy Mansion. She is now 64. The case was never prosecuted criminally because the statute of limitations had passed. Dozens of women have accused Cosby of assault. Cosby was jailed in Pennsylvania in a separate criminal case in 2018, but was freed last year when his conviction was overturned on a technicality. Ivan Xavier Odiver, Mata ng Agila, International, Los Angeles, California. Trusted, connected, on point.
As American corporations announce a record number of inclusion initiatives and diversity, Silicon Valley has seen the wage gap narrow for all minority groups except one, the Black women. According to a new report by Hired, the wage gap for African American women widened to $0.92 for every $1 a white man earns in 2021. This compared to $0.94 recorded a year earlier. Though the situation has improved for some groups, female tech workers of all races still make less than their male counterparts, with Black and Hispanic women receiving the lowest wages. U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that last year, 26.2% of people working in the computer and mathematical occupations in 2021 were women and 8.5% were Black. At the same time, the study released on June 21 showed only about 1 in 5 tech candidates who used the Hired platform in 2021 identified as female. With more than 1/3 of the tech positions only interviewing male candidates, women were about 13% less likely to receive an interview request on average compared to male candidates. The report analyzed almost 820,000 interview requests and job offers facilitated through Hired's marketplace from January 2018 through December 2021. Bloomberg stated that the report comes as tech companies face scrutiny from employees urging more diversity, inclusion initiatives, and equity.
Good news for firefighters in the U.S. The White House has announced plans to increase pay and give additional benefits to federal firefighters. In Washington, D.C., Jeff Sanidad reports.
The Biden-Harris administration announces a series of steps to increase pay, create new mental wellness and health support, and establish a new wildland fire management job series for federal firefighters. These actions are funded by $600 million from Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. The measure aimed to deliver an immediate temporary pay raise to federal wildland firefighters across the nation. The White House says the announced step set federal agencies on a path to continue working with stakeholders towards an updated, competitive, and equitable pay structure. It also mentions a support system that will address challenges faced by the country's wildland firefighter workforce for decades. Aside from the increase in pay and new support for firefighters, the measures include improving recruitment and retention and establishing new wildland fire management occupational series. Jeff Sanidad, Washington, D.C., Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
After days of escalating public pressure, Chinese police have finally issued an update on the investigation into a brutal Tangshan restaurant attack that happened last June 10. The Tangshan police reported that 2 women were hospitalized with non-life-threatening injuries and were in stable condition. They suffered second-degree minor injuries. The other 2 victims did not need hospitalization due to slight injuries. No other information was provided by the authorities. The victims, as well as their friends and family, also remained silent. However, the police statement failed to hush public outrage or address concerns for the victims. As seen in the surveillance footage via Weibo, 3 women are shown sharing a meal in a barbecue restaurant when a man approaches their table and places his hand on the back of one of the women. The victim repeatedly pushes the man away, but the latter slaps her and pushes her to the ground as she scuffles to fend him off. Thereafter, the attackers kick and punch the women. The graphic video sent shockwaves across the country after the incident was leaked online, rekindling a debate on violence against women in China. Gender-based violence is commonly in the news in China. In January, a woman was chained up by her husband, triggering outrage on social media and pushing Prime Minister Li Keqiang to pledge to end the trafficking of women and children in the country.
The United States says it plans to drastically cut the nicotine levels in cigarettes and other combusted tobacco products. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration is working to establish a maximum nicotine level for cigarettes. According to the FDA commissioner, nicotine is powerfully addictive. He says lowering nicotine levels in cigarettes would lessen the likelihood of young people getting hooked while helping current smokers quit. The FDA reports that 480,000 people die prematurely from smoking attributed diseases. This makes tobacco use the leading cause of preventable disease and death in the U.S. Coming right up, Russian ruble hits near 7-year high versus U.S. dollar. Dramatic rescue at World Championships after a U.S. swimmer faints and sinks to the bottom of the pool. And Brad Pitt suggests possible retirement from acting. Catch the latest in business, sports, and entertainment when Mata ng Agila International returns.
Buong pamilya, pati ang barkada. Ang inyong aso, pati inyong mga pusa. Magsama-sama tromayo.
Ang inyong pinakabagong ganso.
Dito sa Net25.
Walang iba kundi ang
Visa City!
Open for Business with Cesar Vallejos every Sunday, 9 p.m.
This is still Mata ng Agila International. The national government has registered a budget deficit of about 146.8 billion pesos in May from a surplus of 4.93 billion pesos in April. The Bureau of Treasury reports that the deficit was down by 26.7% from the 200.3 billion pesos recorded the same month last year. The resulting year-to-date budget cap likewise declined by 18.99% to 458.7 billion pesos from the previous year's outturn of 566.2 billion pesos. Driven mainly by tax collections, the country's total revenues for last month grew by 18.91% to 304.9 billion pesos compared to 256.4 billion pesos collected in May 2021. A deficit happens when the state spends more than it collects.
Recent trading saw the Russian ruble leap to its best rate since June of 2015 of 53 against the US dollar, while reaching 55.36 to the euro, its best rate since May 2015. The ruble, which has become the world's best performing currency this year, is steered by strong commodity exports, trade balances, and the upcoming tax period for companies. Despite the Russian currency's boost, stocks showed a mixed reaction amid month-low Brent crude oil prices of $109.6 per barrel. The USD-denominated RTS index went up to 0.8%, but the ruble-denominated MOEX Russian index dropped 0.5%.
British consumers have just 100 days to spend £16 billion worth of paper banknotes before they are no longer legal tender. Here's our UK correspondent, Ryan Florentino, for the details.
The days of spending paper banknotes in shops are numbered, 100 days to be exact, so start hunting at home. Remaining paper £20 or £50 notes should be spent or deposited by the end of September, the Bank of England said. An estimated 163 million paper £50 banknotes and about 314 million £20 paper notes were still in circulation, the bank said. These notes are being replaced with plastic versions, just like the £5 and £10 notes, which are more durable. The bank said the newer polymer notes are also harder to counterfeit. The majority of paper banknotes have now been taken out of circulation, but a significant number remain in the economy. So we're asking you to check if you have any at home, said the bank's chief cashier, Sarah John, whose signature is on the new notes. From October, people with a UK bank account will still be able to deposit paper notes into their account, but spending them will be impossible. Also featured on the new plastic notes is historical figure Alan Turing and his artwork. Reporting from the United Kingdom, I'm Ryan Florentino for Matanang Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
A black former Tesla worker who said he was a victim of racial abuse rejected a $15 million award after the amount was drastically reduced by a judge. Owen Diaz, who worked at Tesla's plant in Fremont, California in 2015 and 2016 as an elevator operator, said he was faced with daily racist epithets, including the N-word. He was originally awarded $6.9 million in damages for emotional distress and $130 million as punitive damages in the case. However, a judge slashed that by nearly 90% to $15 million. Diaz's rejection of the award could mean a new trial in the case. According to court filings, Diaz alleged that employees drew swastikas and left racist graffiti and drawings around the plant, but his supervisors failed to stop the abuse. A representative for Elon Musk's Tesla could not immediately be reached for comment.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said that banks from BRICS nations can freely connect to the system for transfer of financial messages, or SPFS, Russia's alternative to SWIFT. While addressing a BRICS business forum, Putin said that together with its partners, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa, Moscow is developing reliable alternatives for international payments. SPFS has similar functionality to SWIFT and allows the transmission of messages between financial institutions in the same format, according to Putin. It was created by the Bank of Russia as an alternative to the Belgium-based system when Moscow was hit with Western sanctions over the conflict in Ukraine. Putin also noted that work is underway to create an international reserve currency based on a basket of BRICS currencies.
Artistic swimmer Anita Alvarez was dramatically rescued from the bottom of the pool by Team USA's head coach. This after fainting in a distressing scene at the World Aquatics Championships in Budapest. Head coach Andrea Fuentes, dressed not in swimming gear but in shorts and a t-shirt, dived to the bottom of the pool and dragged Alvarez to the surface before being assisted to get the stricken American to the edge of the pool. Alvarez was taken on a stretcher to the pool's medical center. Teammates and fans appeared to be in shock, poolside, with some in tears consoling each other. Fuentes, also a four-time Olympic artistic swimming medalist, told the press that the incident was very intense because Alvarez was not breathing for at least 2 minutes because her lungs were full of water. The USA team released a statement from Fuentes saying Alvarez had fainted due to the effort expended during the routine. The doctors checked all her vitals and everything is normal.
Fans of Brad Pitt might be disappointed to hear the Hollywood actor saying he's on his last leg when it comes to his acting career. During his latest interview for GQ magazine's upcoming issue, the 58-year-old actor opened up about his life and plans to take the wheel when it comes to what the writer called the final stages of the leading man's career. Pitt explained that he considers himself on the last leg of his acting career in the last semester or trimester. Though the Oscar-winning actor did not say exactly when he will retire, he said he wanted to always make art in some way or the other. Pitt, who has given many acclaimed performances in his over 30 years in Hollywood, also revealed that he is busy wearing his producer hat for Plan B Entertainment. But worry not, the blue-eyed actor is slated to return for the films Bullet Train and Babylon, which will be out later this year.
The last printed edition of Time Out London is on the streets, bringing to an end a 54-year run for the magazine that started life as a listings publication. Time Out was first published in London in the summer of 1968 and has since grown to cover more than 300 cities in almost 60 countries. The London edition became a free magazine in 2012, often handed out at underground and train stations, as well as being found in supermarkets, concert venues, and even pubs.
And people feel really strongly about Time Out in the cities where we exist. So yeah, we've definitely had a strong reaction from some people when we say we're not going to be putting a magazine out there anymore. But I think that strong reaction comes because people have a really, really strong connection with our brand. But what I'm hearing generally from people, though, is that they're like, oh, interesting, you're not putting a magazine out there anymore. But they already know that they can find our inspiration and ideas of what to do in their cities on our website, on social, on videos, at the events we put on.
Indeed, the world showcases a rich past. Here's a look back at what happened on this day. In 1868, American inventor Christopher Latham Sholes patented the Sholes and Glidden typewriter, the first commercially successful of its kind. The machine incorporated elements that became fundamental to typewriter design, including a 4-row QWERTY keyboard. However, it can only print uppercase letters and was a blind writer, meaning the typist could not see what was being typed without lifting up the carriage. In 1989, Tim Burton's spin on the story of Batman was released in theaters. In a new marketing strategy that would become a trend for superhero movies, Warner Brothers hyped Batman as a major summer event. The results were stunning, as it grossed some $100 million in its first 10 days of release. And in 2016, the United Kingdom voted in a referendum to withdraw from the European Union, with 51.9% supporting Britain's exit or Brexit and 48.1% opposing the move. It marked the first time a country had decided to leave the organization. The UK had been part of the Union since 1973.
And to end our evening, here's a quote from radio host Earl Nightingale. Never give up on a dream just because of the time it will take to accomplish it. The time will pass anyway.
And that is a wrap for tonight's news. Catch the latest updates on our social media channels. I'm CJ Hero.
And I'm Nina Richie Alago Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.